Horror is subjective. This is a phrase that people use all the time for horror movies, usually to explain why someone does or doesn't find a horror movie scary. Why people are scared of certain things and not others is something that's frankly above my pay grade, and I'm sure there are plenty of smarter people out there that could give you the answer to that question. But the fact that really matters is that horror will affect everyone in a different way, which makes it rather hard to make in a world where you need to make things to be appealable to as many people as possible. Ever since the release of Amnesia: The Dark Descent, we've been primarily in what I call stress horror. Stress horror is where the things that are scary aren't even scaring you, and it's more so the stress of being found that's making things scary. There isn't dread of what's out there or fear of every little creak and groan. It's more about running from something because you're defenseless, and so it instills a sense of panic and stress in you. I remember when I played the original Outlast, I had to take it in bursts. Not because I was genuinely scared of what was chasing me in the game, but my heart would always be pounding from always having to play the cat and mouse game with the villains. I believe that all great horror understands one simple concept: dread. When a game or movie can make a player feel dread, it doesn't really matter what the thing or person actually is. You just have to give the audience enough to let their mind run wild with what it could be or could do. PT, still considered by many to be one of the scariest games of all time, and it's only about a 30-minute teaser for a game that never came out. How PT pulled off such terror in players is because it understood dread. The sounds of Lisa breathing while you walk down the same dark corridor is enough to send chills down players' spines as they fear that Lisa or something else could just be around the corner, or just behind you, staring. PT didn't have to rely on jump scares to become one of the scariest games ever. PT didn't have to chase you with a big scary monster with a generic scary design on it. No, PT gave you the tools to do all the scaring yourself.
Who was shot in the stomach. 204-863. Seen after neighbors called 911, found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, look behind you.
And this brings me to this video. No one lives under the lighthouse. This game not only understands what dread is, but it's the only game that I've played to actually understand the lessons of PT and successfully make them into a full game. Or at least the first half. Every cutscene, every room, every object, feeling just out of focus, as if it were still trying to adjust. Never quite being able to make out what you're looking at if it's not right in front of you. Obscuring things in the distance just enough to make you second guess yourself on what it is you're looking at. No One Lives Under the Lighthouse not only keeps models low poly and textures simple so as to not draw too much attention to the details of things, but also adds a filter to distort everything further. The game is unconcerned with clarity and instead understands how to use its style against you. Things seemingly just out of sight, or movement just far enough out that you can't tell if it's just something blowing in the ocean breeze or something more sinister working. The lack of clarity in the visuals feels as though everything is being remembered by someone as they recall the events we're watching unfold, and many drinks and even more time have begun to wash away the details as everything begins to bleed into the next. Many of the objects and places on the island feel realistic and accurate to real life, but something just feels off about everything. You can just sense that something's not right about everything on the island, but when you look at everything, it looks normal. Until you realize that it's what's underneath that you should be concerned about. But at that point, it's already too late. The visual design of the later areas feeling alien in nature but still having layouts that are believable and comprehensible as to feel less like otherworldly hellscapes and more like an ancient place that has long since been forgotten about by the modern world, and you're the first person to lay eyes on them in a long time. We play as a normal man, not the prophesized hero of some fantastical land. We don't have special powers, and without anything to really defend ourselves, we truly feel helpless, which only stands to make us fear something being on this island with us more and more. Refilling the oil every night, cranking the gears to turn the light, fixing the house as the harsh ocean takes its toll on it. All meaningless tasks that are similar to tasks that we often avoid doing in our real day-to-day lives. Every part of good game design tells me that I should hate every second of this game, and yet every minute was keeping me glued to my seat and making my hands sweat more and more. Focusing on trivial housekeeping tasks lowers our guard. It makes us feel safe. When has anything bad happened while we're at home sweeping our floors? Never. So why should we be any more scared here? And this is where No One Lives Under the Lighthouse gets you. Just when you let your guard down, it throws something at you to put it right back up. Sometimes it's something small and simple, like having an object move when you aren't looking, or it could be something briefly appearing in your peripheral. Not enough to send you into a full-blown panic, but enough to keep you on edge. Strange things happen, but they never repeat, making things unpredictable and unexpected. How can we anticipate things when there's no pattern? We're also very early on shown a large trunk with 4 locks on it. Intriguing for sure, and more than enough to make you search everywhere to find those 4 keys. This need to explore acting as a double-edged sword. It gets us closer to figuring out what's in this trunk, but in return, we're also forced to witness more of the horrors that the island has. Many of the most frightening moments of the game were moments you would never have experienced had you just worried about doing the job you were brought to this island to do. But if you do find all 4 keys, you can finally unlock the trunk and figure out what's inside. A gun. The one thing that could possibly give us any courage in this situation is finally in our hands. So we feel that power finally return to us, and we feel the control return to us instead of whatever is out there. But plenty of games give you a gun to fight back, Resident Evil being the most prominent example here. But they keep the terror by making it feel sparse and that you don't want to waste the little bit of supplies you do have. But No One Lives Under the Lighthouse quickly shows us that having the gun really does put all the power back into our hands, as it's able to make quick work of any of the horrors that attack you. So, with seemingly enough supply for the threat at hand, the threat of having to fight goes out the window. If the game had doubled down on its slow burn tension and subtle scare tactics, then it would have been a far more consistent and better experience overall. To have such an intoxicating and immersive first half, it only stands to make the lackluster second half feel all the more disappointing. The story of No One Lives Under the Lighthouse is really conflicting, slowly going through each day as this lighthouse caretaker, doing chores around the small and isolated island, leaving you to ponder on your own as almost no words are spoken the whole time. Instead, having to rely heavily on visual clues to give away tidbits of information and lots of work on the player's part. No One Lives Under the Lighthouse does not treat its audience like children even once, requiring you to think from the very beginning, leaving important details in every single scene. You'll see something out of the corner of your eye, or there'll be little details that signal that something isn't right, but the game never dwells on these moments. They disappear as if they had never existed in the first place. The game doesn't even make the horror the main focus at first, as if it were trying to gaslight you and tell you that it never really happened, driving you more and more crazy as you start to question what you actually experienced and what's just your own mind playing tricks on you. It feels as if an aura of evil were on every brick, nail, and blade of grass. An aura so thick you can almost taste it, but at the same time, nothing at all. Evil feels so present at every moment, as if it were following just behind you with every step. Indescribable, a presence without form, a fear without evidence, as if it were a part of a dimension we couldn't see but could feel at an instinctual level. Every moment feels like a dream and a nightmare at the same time, feeling real and visceral but distant at the same time, moving slowly as if you were running in your own bed, trying to escape from a horror that you yourself don't even fully understand. All you know is that there's a reason you're afraid, even if subconsciously. Moments happening only minutes before, already feeling hazy in your mind, as if your mind were trying to protect you. That is, until the second half of the game. The second half feels like it was made by a completely different team, as if the game had been abandoned halfway through and they had come in to finally finish it. The first half feels like a slow but realistic descent into madness and paranoia, but the second feels like almost a parody of everything the first half stood against. The evil is given a physical form that you not only see, but can kill. Once you can kill the thing that's been terrorizing you the whole time, it loses all of its dread and fear.
If you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe in him.
What made the first half good wasn't wondering what this creature could look like. It was the fear that it had no physical form, as if it were a force of nature, always there, a part of the very world we live in. But seeing the creature even once makes it much easier to rationalize and comprehend. It's the same reason Michael Myers is scary. He feels like a cold, calculating force of nature, devoid of life outside of the human body that he controls. He feels like something larger than life, unkillable and unwavering. Also, we go from following a lighthouse caretaker who's just trying to do his job to run the lighthouse, to a man trying to fight against creatures in a hellscape. The story no longer follows a linear fashion as we switch perspectives and travel through time, seemingly to see the island at different time periods, learning that the fate of our seemingly unique lighthouse caretaker may not have been so unique, as other caretakers meet the same fate as him, as if he were destined to repeat in their footsteps. And then we learn the truth, and everything crumbles. Every scare, every double take, even the hellish nightmares that we had to fight, fabrications. The caretaker conjures everything as a representation of his guilt, a son lost as he's sacrificed to beings that may or may not exist. The father now drinks his sorrows away as his mind torments him from within. While having the creatures and the rest of the horrors of the game represent the guilt and regret that the main character feels is not novel, Silent Hill 2 most famously did this, as everything in the town represented James's guilt for murdering his wife while she was sick with cancer. It's an interesting concept to explore, and the game does try to handle it with its own twists and nuances, but for a game that just felt so novel and unique in its presentation up until this, it feels like a betrayal. So much potential to be something completely unique and new, squandered for the sake of wanting to feel deep. We don't always need an explanation as to who, what, or why we are experiencing all the scares. In fact, oftentimes, less is more in that regard. Having an evil that doesn't have an explanation as to why it does what it does is terrifying, as we can't really understand it fully since we often understand things through emotion. If we cannot understand how something makes us feel, then we can never feel comfortable around it. Trying to comprehend the incomprehensible is impossible. Having the game continue the same way the first half had, making you question everything and slowly driving you crazy, and just leaving it at that, would have been a far better and focused story. The story would have left us feeling unsatisfied in the best way possible, slowly building to a climax that will never come, filling us up with more and more tension and dread, and never giving us that release, leaving that tension to stay with the player for hours, days, or maybe even weeks after the credits roll. Instead, the game leaves us with an ending that feels like it ends for the sake of having an ending, rather than feeling as if it were the logical conclusion the game had been leading us to the whole time. The echoing horns of the lighthouse pierce through to every corner of the island, day after day. Or perhaps it's the roar of an evil, older than the island itself, as it warns you of entering into its territory. An evil that can't be seen, only heard, slowly driving you insane as to what an evil that sounds like that could even look like. Walking up those long spiral stairs to the only safety of the island, the lighthouse. You let that same noise call to you, letting your mind ruminate on it, conjuring all types of horrors. The music of No One Lives Under the Lighthouse can barely be classified as music, at least in the traditional sense. There aren't melodies, themes, or lyrics, only unnerving sounds that can never really be discerned if they're in fact the music or part of the game playing tricks on you. The non-traditional soundtrack of this game helps set that feeling of unease right from the first scene, as it amplifies that sense of dread that's lying just beneath the surface of every inch of that island. It's as if the music were a living, breathing creature reacting to every movement, action, and reaction, intensifying as your mind fills with fear, ever so slightly creeping in the background of even the most insignificant moments, reminding you that it's always there, elevating the horror and intensifying every moment. The music is like a fine wine, pairing perfectly with the main entree that is the world and gameplay. It never steals the show outright, but succeeds at elevating what you're already experiencing to make it a memorable and unique experience. I can say that every track fits perfectly at every moment and never sticking out as bad or ruining my immersion in any way, but outside of the context of the game and the moments that each track plays at, it would likely just sound like noise and be far less charming. The biggest criticism is that the music is fitting too well with the game, making it harder to enjoy out of context, but that's far from being the worst thing to be known for. When it comes to horror, this is my favorite style of music to have, as I feel it's so powerful without having to be overbearing. But knowing that they never sound quite as good when you listen to them on their own, I understand why more games don't use a similar style. Silent Hill was the first game that I ever heard this style of music in, and No One Lives Under the Lighthouse was the first game in a long time to scratch that same itch. No One Lives Under the Lighthouse has some of the best atmosphere I've ever experienced in a game, reaching the heights of the industry gold standards like Silent Hill 2 and PT, but it has one of the most baffling 180s in the second half as well, throwing out tightly constructed events with hidden details in every corner for a second half that's far more concerned with being different for different sake. But even despite all of the faults that I had with the second half of the game, I still went in immediately after the credits to play it all over again and find even more details on repeat playthrough. I think that first half is so spectacular that it more than makes up for that issue in the second half, and as I stated back at the start of this video, horror is subjective, so just because I wasn't a fan of the second half doesn't mean that many others will share the opposite sentiment as my own. The second half is more visually interesting as well, as it takes you to more unique locations and more of the mythos of the world is explored, which is interesting in its own right. Even if I think that the game would benefit without it, it's undeniably a compelling world that's set up throughout the second half. A world of otherworldly entities and cults that worship them as their gods and kill innocent people to please them. No One Lives Under the Lighthouse undoubtedly won me over with all its charm and the clear amount of passion that was put into it. The game tries a lot of unique things for a horror game, and not all of it succeeds, but it's trying to be unique in a genre that's been in a rut as of late, and even if it fell a bit short at times, I can't recommend this game enough. Even if it's only vaguely sounding interesting to you, I can guarantee that talking about this game is nothing compared to how spectacular that opening act is. That opening act is something that I already wish I could experience for the first time again. Thank you guys again for watching. Please give the video a like if you enjoyed, and feel free to leave a comment on what I should cover next. But until then, see you guys next time.